Hello everyone. Welcome back to our English learning story. Today's story is called Prove Yourself. It is about a boy who was known for being lazy, but later he showed that smart thinking and motivation can change everything. While listening, you will also learn new words and how to use them in sentences. So, listen carefully, practice with me, and stay with us until the end of the story. Let's begin. In a small and peaceful town, there lived a boy named Ethan with his parents. Their home was built on the edge of the fields, where they grew vegetables and grains to survive. Ethan's parents were hardworking people, but Ethan himself was known to be lazy. He did not like to spend his energy on hard labor. Instead, he always searched for the easiest way to complete his tasks. Whenever his father asked him to help in the field, he tried to finish quickly so he could go back to resting. People in the village noticed his habits and whispered that Ethan would never achieve much if he continued this way. But Ethan never paid attention to what they said. His main duty in the family's fields was to guard the crops from hungry birds that came in flocks, trying to eat the seeds and fresh shoots. Most children or farmers would walk around, clap loudly, or wave sticks to chase them away. Some even used slingshots, throwing small stones into the air to frighten the birds. But Ethan did not enjoy running or standing under the sun for long hours. Instead, he came up with a trick. He tied empty tins and shiny metal pieces to ropes stretched across the field. Whenever the wind blew, the tins made noise and the light reflected, scaring the birds without Ethan having to move much. Ethan would sit under the shade of a tree, watching the birds fly away, feeling proud of his clever shortcut. Although Ethan's plan worked, his father often looked at him with worry. He thought to himself, "My son avoids work now. But what will happen when I am no longer strong enough to take care of these fields? How will he manage to protect our family's livelihood if he never learns real effort?" Still, he didn't scold Ethan too much, because at least the boy's method managed to keep the crops safe. Deep inside, however, his father wished that Ethan would someday understand the importance of hard work. The neighbors also noticed Ethan's unusual ways, and some laughed while others admired his creativity. Yet no one believed he would ever grow into a responsible man unless something forced him to change. One summer, the sun shone more fiercely than usual, and the earth grew dry. It was during this harsh season that Ethan's father suddenly became ill. He could no longer walk to the fields or guide his son as before. The responsibility of the land now rested completely on Ethan's shoulders. At first, Ethan tried to do what his father usually did. He carried water to the plants, chased away pests, and checked the soil. But he quickly grew tired. Since he was not used to working from morning until evening, sweat poured down his face, and his arms ached with pain. Days passed, and Ethan realized he was not doing enough. The plants began to droop under the hot sun, their leaves turning yellow. Without regular care, the soil became hard and cracked, and the crops started to wither. Every night, Ethan sat outside the house, staring at the dark fields and listening to the sound of silence. Where once there had been life, he felt guilty and helpless, knowing that the survival of his family depended on him. Yet he lacked the strength and discipline to save the fields. The stars above him seemed distant, and his heart was heavy with disappointment as he thought of how his laziness had brought him to this point. The very next morning, when the sun was just rising, Ethan heard unusual voices from the center of the village. Curious, he left his house and followed the sound of people gathering. A soldier stood proudly on a wooden platform, his armor shining as he announced an exciting challenge from the royal palace. The king had declared that anyone who could pass a series of tests would be rewarded with gold, land, and respect. The people listened carefully, their eyes wide with excitement, whispering among themselves about how life-changing such a prize could be. For a struggling family like Ethan's, it sounded like the only chance to escape from hardship. Ethan's heart started to beat faster as he listened to the soldier. He thought about his father lying weak inside the house and the dry crops that were dying in the fields. This is my chance, though a little voice in his head reminded him of his laziness and weakness. When he boldly announced that he would join the competition, the villagers burst into laughter. They mocked him, saying, "How can a boy who avoids work even dream of winning such a grand contest?" Some shook their heads, while others smirked as if watching a silly joke. But Ethan ignored their words, holding on to the hope that maybe, with cleverness, he could do what others could not. The journey to the palace was not easy. Ethan had to travel for 3 days across rough paths, carrying only a small bag of food and water. His legs ached from walking so far, something he was never used to, and more than once he thought about turning back. But each time he remembered his father's weak face and the dying plants. He pushed himself forward. At night, he slept under the stars, whispering to himself that if he could reach the palace, his family's life might change forever. By the 3rd day, he finally saw the tall palace gates and the crowd of competitors waiting outside. When the contest began, all the participants were gathered near a wide and shining river. The water stretched far into the distance, and the current looked strong. The announcer raised his voice, explaining that the first challenge was to cross the river and reach the other side. Only the first few who made it would qualify for the next round. The crowd roared with excitement, and the competitors prepared themselves eagerly. Ethan, standing among strong men with muscular arms and confident faces, felt his courage weaken. How can I possibly match their strength? He wondered nervously, biting his lip. At the sound of the horn, the contest began. Without hesitation, the strong men leaped into the water, splashing and swimming with all their power. Some moved quickly, their strokes strong, while others shouted as they tried to stay ahead. Ethan, however, stood on the riverbank, frozen in thought. He knew he would never outswim them, and if he tried, he would probably sink before even reaching halfway. The villagers who had followed laughed again, thinking he would surely fail at the very beginning. But Ethan's mind worked differently. Instead of jumping into the water, he scanned the area around him, searching for another way. Not far from the river, Ethan noticed broken bamboo poles, dry branches, and some rope left behind by fishermen. An idea flashed into his mind, and he quickly gathered the materials. While the others grew tired in the water, Ethan tied the bamboo together to form a small raft. He used a thick branch as a paddle and pushed the raft into the water. It was unsteady at first, but slowly it began to float. Step by step, Ethan paddled forward, using his brain instead of his muscles. Each push of the branch moved him further across, and though his progress was slow, it was steady and safe. As time passed, the swimmers began to lose their strength. Some who had started quickly were now struggling in the middle of the river, gasping for air and moving slower. Ethan, on the other hand, kept advancing without stopping. The crowd watched in surprise as the lazy boy, who they thought would fail, passed many strong men with his little raft. When Ethan finally reached the other side, he placed third, just enough to qualify for the next round. Tired but proud, he stepped onto the riverbank, knowing that his clever thinking had given him the victory he needed. The next day, the remaining contestants gathered in the courtyard of the palace. The king's officials announced the final challenge, and a wave of excitement rushed through the crowd. Each competitor was brought before a massive wooden block, almost as tall as their chest, and told they must push it across a long path until they reached the finish line. Behind them lay several tools they could each choose from. But the rule was simple. They could only pick one. The crowd cheered loudly, eager to see strength and speed decide the winner. Ethan, standing at the edge, felt his heart pounding, but he stayed calm and thoughtful. The first contestant, a tall and muscular man, rushed forward without hesitation. He picked up a thick rope and tied it firmly around his block, pulling with all his might. The second contestant, equally strong, grabbed a heavy stick to use as a lever, pressing it against the block to move it inch by inch. Both men sweated as they pushed, their muscles straining. Yet their determination was clear. Ethan, however, stood quietly for a moment, scanning the tools carefully. People in the crowd laughed again, whispering that the boy would surely embarrass himself after somehow surviving the first round. But Ethan had learned not to listen to their voices anymore. Among the pile of tools, Ethan noticed a small chisel and a sharp knife. While everyone else went for strength, he picked up the chisel. The crowd burst into laughter. "What will he do with that tiny thing?" they mocked. "Will he cut the block into pieces and carry them?" Some shook their heads, convinced he was foolish. Ethan ignored them, sat down beside his block, and began carefully carving. With each strike of the chisel, chips of wood fell away, slowly shaping the heavy block into something different. The officials watched curiously, and even the other contestants glanced at him while struggling with their own blocks. Ethan's plan was simple yet brilliant. He knew he could not drag or lift such a heavy block for such a long distance. So, instead of fighting against the weight, he changed its shape. After nearly an hour of steady work, his wooden block was no longer square. He had carved it into a round shape, almost like a giant wheel. Now, when he pushed it with his hands, it rolled forward with surprising ease. The crowd gasped in disbelief, their laughter turning into silence. What seemed like a weak choice at first had turned into a clever advantage. Meanwhile, the first two contestants were still struggling. The man with the rope pulled hard, his muscles shaking, but the block barely moved on the rough ground. The second competitor's lever worked, but it required tremendous effort for every small movement. Sweat dripped down their faces as they gritted their teeth, while Ethan calmly rolled his wooden wheel down the path. Step by step, the gap between him and the others grew wider. The villagers who had once laughed at him were now standing with their mouths open, amazed at the boy's intelligence and determination. Ethan pushed with all his strength, but compared to the others, his task was lighter now. His wooden ball rolled smoothly over the ground, gathering speed with each push. The crowd began cheering, clapping loudly for the boy who had surprised everyone. Even the officials nodded in approval, impressed by his clever thinking. Every time the ball moved forward, Ethan felt a surge of energy in his heart. He realized that he was no longer the lazy boy people mocked, but someone capable of creating solutions where others only saw problems. His mind and willpower had turned weakness into strength. With each push, the finish line drew closer. Ethan's arms ached and his back was sore, but the thought of his sick father and his struggling family gave him strength to continue. The noise of the cheering crowd echoed in his ears, and for the first time, he felt what it meant to truly work hard for something meaningful. Step by step, his wooden ball rolled ahead, and Ethan's determination grew stronger than his fatigue. The palace gates loomed in front, and the final stretch of the path waited for him to cross. Remember, nothing is impossible when you believe in yourself and take action. Stay focused, stay strong, and never stop learning. Keep practicing your English every day, and you will see amazing results. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories and English lessons. See you next time.